More problems in the fragrance community. All right, so I do make these fragrance videos every once in a while. Um, just basically talking about random stuff. Sometimes I'll do fragrance reviews. Haven't in a while though, since like the pandemic, and I haven't bought a lot of fragrances in the last few years. For whatever reason, I think I started collecting in like 2018, something like that, because I just wanted to smell good. And then I sort of started to like pick up actual habit of really enjoying fragrances and started to realize that there was a lot of cool fragrances out there, a lot of great smelling fragrances, and felt like, hey, you know what, maybe I'll just start collecting. So it's kind of a weird entrance. I just wanted to smell good, get some basic colognes, and of course it just doesn't work that way. Life is often throwing you curveballs, and so like it's difficult to really like, oh, let me just go buy Nautica Voyage or something like, and then you realize like, well, this just smells basic, and then you get some higher quality colognes, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. This could really step my game up. This could really make me smell amazing. And then you kind of start to get hooked at that point because you're like, okay, this is good, but then I want something better, and this is better than what I had before. Now I want something better than this, and you can kind of just snowballs from there, and you end up having like 40, 50 bottles like I do now. Um, so I want to talk about some of the mistakes that I've made along the way, and then I also want to talk about some of the problems within the fragrance community because there is a lot of problems in the fragrance community. Um, so let me just start off with some of the mistakes that I made. Some of the mistakes that I made were, first of all, following the Fragcom hype. Fragcom is basically shorthand for the fragrance community. Following Fragcom hype. Sometimes the hype is right. I would say rarely it's right. Most of the time it's either totally wrong or it's like kind of right. Okay, if that makes sense. So what I learned over the years was you have to find fragrances that you really like. You have to find fragrances that make you feel good, that make you have a certain type of feeling. Um, you want fragrances that sort of invoke a mood, right? They give you pleasure in your surroundings. They make you want to go outside and go for a walk, and then you smell yourself, and it kind of just you know creates this pleasant aroma, pleasant mood that and it kind of enhances your life. That's really what fragrance pursuit should be about. So a lot of times, what happens is guys come into the fragrance community for the wrong reasons, like, oh, I want to impress others, and so a lot of the Fragcom hype has to do with like impressing other people. So the mistake that I made was like, oh yeah, this must be a good cologne because like everybody's saying it's a great cologne. It must be a good cologne, and then you go out and buy it. You blind buy it because a lot of times in the fragrance community or a lot of times in the fragrance world, it's hard to sample first because a lot of fragrances kind of fall under the radar of like either they're not at like you go to like Sephora or J.C. Penney's or Macy's or something, and they're not there to test, right? So I would highly recommend you go to a place like Sephora, J.C. Penney's, or Macy's if you're looking to find and test unique fragrances or good fragrances that you've never smelled before. You should, if you're into the fragrance community, you should spend a lot of time at these places because that's how you can test out a fragrance for free and figure out like, hey, I really like this. This smells good. There's plenty of fragrances that I tested first that I never would have bought or never would have even been on my radar if I hadn't gone and tested it. So I tested those first, and then I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" And I went and bought it, and I love the fragrance. That's happened to me with a bunch of bottles. I'm actually wearing one right now. Hermes, I say that Thierry Hermes. It's called Eau de Eau Givre, something like that, which is basically it's a flanker of the original Thierry de Hermes EDT, and then I also got the Vetiver Intense, which I love, one of my favorites of all time. Um, so test first instead of following the hype train. Don't just go on like a Facebook fragrance group, um, and like Sauvage or Versace Eros or like Acqua di Gio Profumo, like it's got all this hype and like I'll go buy it without smelling it because everybody must like it. It's like that's not how you need to do it. And I've got a bunch of fragrances like that I just kind of don't really care that much about. And Acqua di Gio Profumo is one of them. Actually, when I first smelled it, I really liked it, but that was when my nose was a lot less mature. After a few years in the fragrance game, after you collect 40, 50 fragrances, your nose starts to mature. You are able to detect what a good blend is, what a good composition of a fragrance is. And not only do you develop a nose for something that's quality, you also develop a nose for what you like and what style of fragrances you like. Do you like amber fragrances? Do you like blue fragrances? Do you like aquatic fragrances? Do you like citrus based fragrances? Do you like freshy based fragrances? Do you like dark, kind of burnt, kind of, really bad boy fragrances? There's so many different types of fragrances out there. So after you've sampled and after you've bought a bunch of bottles, you start to learn, I really love this style. I really love this type of fragrance. And then you're going to come across fragrances that are just super unique. And you're like, wow, this is just so unique. And I just love it. It's so, it's just so unlike most of these mainstream crowd pleasing fragrances. And it's so me, you know what I mean? And you can't really do that if you're always just following the hype train. You're always just buying fragrances that everybody else recommends. And I think a lot of people, and which is part of the problem of the fragrance community, because there's so many followers, there's so many, like it kind of exposes like sheep mentality. It kind of exposes like how people love to be influenced by other people, and how like people love to kind of conglomerate together and like, oh yeah, we all share the same opinion. And it's that whole lemming effect, right? So one of the things that makes fragrances so great is that you can totally branch out on your own and just go and find something that nobody else has, nobody else wears, that's crazy unique. I mean, there's so many niche houses out there. There's so many, and even designers. There's rare designer fragrances, and I say rare because like there's designer fragrances out there that people just don't talk about, right? So part of what makes the fragrance or obviously the fragrance community, but part of what makes collecting fragrances so great is that you can go out and branch out and find your own thing. So, but you can't do that if you're constantly following the hype train. So that's one mistake that newcomers often make, and it's a big mistake, because a lot of times too you can get, and I see a lot of people share like their, in the fragrance, on like the Facebook fragrance groups, a lot of guys share like, rate my collection or roast my collection or something. And it's like, it's almost always, I wouldn't say always, but so many times it's just like the basic, you got your Dior Sauvages, you got your Acqua di Gios, you got your Dior Fahrenheit, you got your, your Versace Dylan Blue, you got your, Bulgari Aqua, or Bulgari Aqua is a little bit more rare, but anyway, you get my point. Like it's just this like cookie cutter mainstream fragrances that like everybody has, and you're just like, man, there's no ingenuity. So that's one mistake. Another mistake is not testing fragrances. I would say two mistakes: not testing fragrances, and then also, blind buying, not testing fragrances before you buy them, blind buying, which is a big mistake. And then also buying cheapies, right? So when you buy cheapies, you're trying to save some money and you're like, oh, let me just go spend $30 on this. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some wonderful fragrances that you can get for $30. You just have to like figure out what those fragrances are. But a lot of times, like, you'll see guys going to like clone houses like Armoff. I made this mistake when I first came in to the fragrance game. I would buy a bunch of Armoff because it was like $20 a hit, and I was like, oh yeah, I can get like 4 of these for the price of like one of these mainstream, like, you know, this is totally a better deal. And then they all sucked, and you're like, oh okay. Like after a while, you do that for a while, and you learn like, okay, I need to choose better. Actually, Armoff has a couple good offerings. Like Tres Nuit is pretty good. Le Parfait and Tres Nuit are like almost the same fragrance, but they're both pretty good. I hear Club de Nuit Intense Man is pretty good, although I've never actually owned it, or I've never really smelled it. I smelled it once at the mall, and I think it was a bad bottle because it didn't smell right. Which is another mistake in the fragrance game that I'm going to talk about in a second, which is bad bottles. Um, but don't blind buy and don't buy cheapies. Don't blind buy and don't buy cheapies. The reason why you don't want to blind buy is because you don't know what that fragrance smells like. And a lot of times when people blind buy, they're buying off of recommendations. They're buying off of uh, fragrance train hype, or when people when other people talk about the fragrance. Oh yeah, this is really good, or I got this recommended. Not to say you can't get something good recommended. Somebody recommended me Givenchy Gentleman Only. I love that fragrance. Somebody recommended me John Varvatos EDT. I love that fragrance. Both of those were actually they weren't blind buys. The Givenchy Gentleman EDT, or no, excuse me, the Givenchy Gentleman Only, um, I got a sample of, and then somebody traded me for John Varvatos EDT, which I love. Both of those fragrances are very manly fragrances. Let's see, what else was I recommended? Oh, there's a couple that I recommended that I really don't like. Curve, Liz Claiborne Curve for men, and then I think Lucky Number Six or something like that. Lucky Number Six, which actually isn't too bad. Lucky Number Six isn't too bad. It's like a plum fragrance, but I didn't like my bottle of Curb. It might be a bad bottle. I'm not sure. So with that said, let me talk about bad bottles. So I just ordered from Joma Shop, which I learned today is a drop shipping site. Way too late. I didn't know it was a drop shipping site. Everything I looked up online, people were like, "Oh, it's legit." Da 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 about Joma Shop. I ordered 4 bottles in the last month. 3 of them are bad. One of them was like pretty good. The Hermes Eau Givré, I'm wearing it right now. Kind of deciphering if it's pretty. I think it's all right. I think it's pretty good. It's like 90-95% good. It smells a little weak. When I tested it at the mall, it was like beast mode. It's kind of weak on my skin right now, but it smells decent. So when you're testing a fragrance, you want to make sure that it smells right. It smells fresh. You want to make sure that there's good projection. You want to make sure that it's sitting on your skin the way it's supposed to sit. Um, Meaning like if it smells a little musty, if it smells weak, if it smells like, if you're like searching for the fragrance, you're not supposed to be searching for the fragrance on your skin. So like let's say you spray your wrist. You spray your wrist, you smell your wrist, and then like it's supposed to be right there. It's supposed to be right on your skin. It's supposed to smell fresh. It's supposed to smell like this is how it's supposed to smell, and it's not supposed to be weak. It should project. Most fragrances project. Some fragrances are just inherently weak. That's true, but there's a difference between a fragrance being weak and a fragrance being damaged, and you could possibly mix those up because um, if a fragrance is damaged, it might come across like weak, and then you might think like, oh, well, this fragrance is just really weak, and then you might go write a review, and you're like, oh, I really, this fragrance smells pretty good, but it's just super weak, da, 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 and you don't realize you got a bad bottle. You don't realize that the reason why it's weak is because the notes have been damaged because it hasn't been stored correctly, which is why I would not recommend guys to find fragrances on eBay. I would not recommend guys to make the mistake that I made and go to Joma Shop. Don't do a place that's like drop shipping. Don't do a place that like isn't a fragrance company. I would recommend Fragrance Net. But even Fragrance Net, it's a discounter. So you're buying fragrances um, that are at least a year old, a year and a half old, 2 years old. Actually, I think I bought a bottle of Mont Blanc Individual, and it was from 2001. I think I'm pretty sure 2001 was was the batch code. Which, by the way, if you buy a bottle of cologne, you go on the bottom of the bottle and you'll find a batch code, or you go on the bottom of the box that it comes in and you'll find a batch code. You go to checkfresh.com and you type in that batch code, and it'll tell you the date the date and year, the month that particular fragrance, that particular bottle, the actual bottle in your hand was manufactured. So you go to discounters because the discounters have fragrances on discount. Obviously, it's in the name, discounters. So like if you go to like Armani's website, actually Armani's a bad example because even at discounters Armani's crazy expensive. Which another crappy thing about certain fragrances is like they're way overpriced. Armani is one of the fragrance houses that their fragrances are just way too overpriced. You'll get 100 ml bottle of Acqua di Gio Profumo is like $120, which is like niche territory. I mean that's a niche price, right? So that's too expensive for Acqua di Gio Profumo. It should only be like $75, in my opinion, based on the quality of that fragrance. It's not a very quality fragrance. Actually, the best from the house of Acqua di Gio, or excuse me, the house of Armani from the Acqua di Gio line is Profondo, which they say is like an aquatic version of Acqua di Gio Pour Homme, which Acqua di Gio Pour Homme is kind of an aquatic in and of itself. I have like an old school bottle of, I think it kind of went bad a little bit. A lot of my fragrances went bad, which is another mistake that I made. A lot of my fragrances went bad. I had them stored in my room, and we had like a really hot summer, 2 years in a row, I think, and I didn't have a wine cooler, and a lot of them went bad. And like, anyway, so I wouldn't say like half of, I don't know, like I had like 10 fragrances go bad, or at least they were damaged. Some of their notes are damaged, which actually in a way was kind of a blessing because now I know what it smells like when a fragrance is damaged. Whereas before I was ordering fragrances off like eBay and stuff, and they'd get to me and I'd smell them and I'd be like, I don't know if I like the smell of this, and I didn't even realize it was damaged. And now I know what a fragrance smells like when it's damaged. So I'm able to, I'm able to kind of decipher that, right? So I'm going off on these tangents. Let's see, where was I? Fragrance community. Yeah, so a lot of the problem with the fragrance community too is like, there's a lot of weirdos like in the fragrance community. Like you'll find some of the best in the fragrance community. Like there's some great people in the fragrance community, like really cool people, really unique people who've got like some of them have like thousands of bottles in their collection, just really unique people. On the other hand, there's a lot of like douchebags. There's a lot of like really crappy people. For instance, like when I was talking about my Joma Shop order, because I ordered some from Joma Shop, which I learned this is how I learned that, as I went on the fragrance community and I posted, and I was like, yeah, my fragrances just don't smell right. What's going on? And somebody told me, they were like, yeah, it's a drop shipping website, which means that like you order something from them, and then they order it from like a third party. So they're not an actual fragrance company. They're a drop shipping company. So it's like they're basically like the middleman, which makes no sense because that means like independent sellers can sell to them, which means that there's no like regulation on how the fragrances are stored. And which is why you should choose FragranceNet, because FragranceNet is an actual company that is focused on fragrances, and they store their fragrances the way this, their fragrances are supposed to be stored. So they go directly to the company, whether it's Armani or whether it's whoever, right? Hermes or Dior or whoever, Cartier, right? Guerlain, whoever, right? Any fragrance website that is specifically for fragrances, they get directly from the manufacturer. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. They get directly from the actual company, right? And then they store those fragrances at their site. So there's actual oversight, there's actual regulations on how the fragrances are stored. Well, the mistake that I made, I didn't know that Joma Shop was a drop shipping site, which I should have. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, that makes sense because they're not an actual fragrance website. They sell watches, they sell clothing, they sell all kinds of stuff, right? So they're basically just a retail website, third party, drop shipping, middleman kind of deal. So you're basically taking a risk, right? So I don't think they don't have to necessarily directly co-opt with the the designer house or the niche house or whatever, right? So if some third party seller goes to Joma Shop and they're like, hey, I got 100 bottles of like Dior Sauvage or whatever, they'll contract with them and they'll take those bottles and then they'll sell them. But they don't. But there's no oversight. They don't know how those bottles were stored. They don't know if those bottles are quality, whatever. So I ordered 4 bottles in the last month. Boss Bottled Oud, which is one of my favorite fragrances of all time. Dior Sauvage Parfum, which is wonderful. For a Sauvage in the Sauvage line, very very good. Let's see what else did I get. Oh, CH Man, and then obviously this Hermes Hugues Vert. So Dior Sauvage Parfum, CH Man, Boss Bottled Oud, and Hermes Hugues Vert, which I really love. I'm wearing it now. Smelling it, it's pretty good. I think it's decent, but the rest of them suck. So the Boss Bottle Oud was like 20% damaged, or I would say 20 to 30% damaged. You can tell because the notes don't smell right. It smells a little bit musty on your arm. Um, the projection is affected, which basically means the top notes or the middle notes are damaged somehow, which means that it was either stored in high heat or it was stored in a place that maybe had sunlight. I don't know. Probably. Well, actually, that's not true because the boxes were not open, so it's probably stored in a place that had high heat. Could have come from Texas or could have come from Florida or someplace. Whatever you do, if you're ever on eBay, like I wouldn't recommend buying fragrances on eBay, even if it's from like Forever Lux or like Perfume Empire. Some people are like swear by these places. I still wouldn't do it because I've just had way too many bad colognes that I bought from eBay. So that was another mistake that I made when I first started out, was buying from bad places. First of all, do not buy from just independent sellers. Do not buy from some dude on Facebook. I just wouldn't recommend it because you don't know where that cologne's been. You don't know what's going on with that cologne. There's no way to get your money back. Too many guys have been burned. I know it's a big deal, like, oh, fragrance swap. Let's all trade fragrances. And I've got some okay bottles occasionally. Like I traded. I forget what I traded, but I traded. I think it was Zara. I think I traded a couple Zaras. I'm not sure. Although Zara's not a quality fragrance place either. It's another cheapie. Although their rich, warm, addictive is pretty good, but in the opening it's pretty good. The dry down sucks. Kind of. It's all right. But I wouldn't recommend buying from Zara. But I traded a Zara for like a John Varvatos EDT, which I love the John Varvatos EDT. It has this. I think it's either a plum note or a fig. I'm pretty sure it's fig. It has this fig note in it that's so good. Um, Also, Varvatos. I think Varvatos is discontinued, but I have a couple of Varvatos that I love, which is Dark Rebel and then Dark Rebel Rider. I think they're really good, but I think my Dark Rebel Rider got a little damaged in the heat. Anyway, so get yourself a wine cooler off Amazon or someplace. A good quality cooler fridge, and keep your temperatures between, I would say, 60 to 70 degrees. I would say a sweet spot is 65. I keep my fragrances at 65. Um, Not too warm, not too cold. It's just good enough. It's worth it because if you keep your fragrances out on the shelf, you're gonna have some hot days. You're gonna regret it. Your fragrance could last up to 10 years if you store it correctly. Keep it in the box. Keep it in a wine cooler, refrigerator, and store it correctly, and it might last you 10 years. I've got some of them that totally went through that heat phase and just were totally fine, but a lot of them got damaged. So I made that mistake early on. Let's see. Buy from a good place. Like I said, I would just recommend Fragrance Net. Like, I really can't recommend any other place. I know there's like My Fragrance Samples, which you could do. I'm interested in like the Boss Bottled Oud line. They have Oud Saffron and Oud Aromatic on Fragrance Net. But they're pretty pricey. They're like 75, $65, and I'm kind of scared to pull the trigger because I might not like them. I hate blind buying. Although the Boss Bottle Oud is so good, I might end up doing that eventually if I come into some money here. Because they're kind of rare fragrances, and occasionally Fragrance Net will get some rare fragrances. But let's see. Oh yeah, then I wanted to talk about, yeah, a little bit about the fragrance community and just kind of how weirdo they are. Like, so when I first went through a heat phase, a lot of my fragrances got damaged, and I posted that online, and I was like, hey man, like, I can't remember what I said. I think I was like, my fragrances got damaged. I made a mistake. I recommend other people to buy a wine cooler or something. And then like just out of the woodwork, like I got just blasted and dragged in the comments by like everybody. Everybody was just like, oh, that's not true. Fragrances are supposed to last, blah blah blah, all this crap. And I'm like, and they were just like attacking me too, like mocking me and stuff. Or like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, da 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 da. And I'm like, you guys are a bunch of weirdos, man. Like, I know exactly what my fragrances smelled like before that summer, and they smelled a lot fresher. They smelled a lot better. I went through this hot summer, and they were all out on my shelf, and then they got damaged. And I'm like, I know what my fragrance is supposed to smell like. I've been smelling these fragrances for a couple years now, and this is not what they used to smell like before this hot summer. The top notes were damaged, the middle notes were damaged, and what happens is that you got to wait. It starts to take Your fragrance will start to take shape in the dry down, but it's supposed to smell good in the top, meaning the opening, and it's supposed to smell good in the middle, meaning when it's transitioning into the dry down. Um, and then there's top notes, middle notes, and then base notes, and these notes are supposed to play off each other in the dry down and all kind of come together and be a nice, beautiful mix in the dry down. But if some of the notes, particularly the top notes or the middle notes, are damaged, or even the base notes are damaged, like your fragrance is not going to smell the same. It's not going to project in the opening, or it's not going to be as beautiful in the opening. Most fragrances smell really nice in the opening, and then they start to change and then become something different in the dry down. So as you transition, you're supposed to smell all three phases: the opening, that mid when you're transitioning into the dry down, and then the dry down is supposed to go strong, where the fragrance takes shape, etc. And what happens when the fragrance is damaged is like the dry down. It just never comes a lot of times, or it comes but it's like really weak, or it comes like 3 or 4 hours later. You're supposed to like smell it right away, and it's weird how it distorts your fragrances. And once you collect like 40, 50 bottles, then you're like, okay, I know what this is supposed to smell like. You start to pick it up and you start to learn, for instance, like I bought these 4 bottles. If I didn't know what a fragrance, if I didn't have so many bottles, I wouldn't know what a fragrance is supposed to smell like. So you get to a point where like you're educated enough and your nose is mature enough to where you can smell something and you're like, oh yeah, this is a fresh fragrance. This is what a fragrance is supposed to smell like. It's projecting well. This is how it's supposed to go. But a lot of times you'll smell a fragrance and you're like, well, there's something wrong here. It's a little off. It's weak. It's like faint. It's musty. It smells a little like dusty almost. Even it smells like something's off about this fragrance. It's not coming out. And even, I don't know, even this Eau Gervais is a little iffy because it's not projecting like it's supposed to. It's not, when I tested at the mall, it was beast mode on my skin. Now it's kind of like, it's a little weak. So I'm even questioning this a little bit, although it's better than the other 3. Yeah, it's just like, you get to a point where you're able to pick it up and recognize it right away. And even today, like, or I think it was yesterday, I posted, and I was like, oh yeah, my fragrances smell off. They smell musty, da 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 da. And people still came out of the woodwork to attack me from the fragrance community, and I'm just like, what the hell's going on, man? Like, why? Like I shit you not. Somebody called me. Somebody was like, okay, so actually, so see what happened. So I posted that, and then like I said something, and I was like, "Wow, I can't believe," because like everybody was like coming out, and they were like attacking me, and they're like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Your nose is da da da. Your nose is this. Your nose is that da da." And I wrote, I wrote a comment, and I was like, "Man, I can't believe people are so like messed up to like attack me about this." And this guy came out of the woodwork and started like calling me names and stuff, and try to like, it was weird, man. It's just like, I don't know, man. The fragrance community can be weird, but I would just say my recommendation to anybody listening who's like getting into fragrance or like really likes fragrance, test a, test a lot, test out and find out what you like. Don't blind buy. Don't try to save money because that's not what fragrance is about. I would rather have one really good bottle of a fragrance that I really love that costs like $70 than four fragrances that cost $20 that I don't like, or that like are just like whatever. I would much rather save up that $80 or 70 $80 and buy one good fragrance that I really love, that I'll really enjoy for the next few years, as opposed to having three fragrances that I'm kind of like whatever. So always go for quality over quantity, even if you have to save up like $100, hundreds. You test out, you find some niche brand that you love. It's worth it. It's worth it to save your money and buy like an expensive fragrance if you love it, love it, love it. That's what fragrance is about. It's not about buying a whole bunch of cheapies just so you can have a lot of cologne that like you barely like, or it smells cheap. Because when you buy cheapies, a lot of times they don't smell right. They're $20 for a reason. Although occasionally you can get a really good deal. Like Issey Miyake is a great example. For instance, for some reason when you go to discounters, those fragrances are just like super discounted, and you can get them for like 20 $25, and they're very high quality. It's rare, but it does happen. And if you know what you're looking for, and you get to a point where like you've tested enough and you smelled enough, like, okay, I know that this is a good fragrance for $25. It can happen. Um, but for the most part, if you're just getting into the fragrance game and you're like, oh yeah, this is a really cheap fragrance, and I looked at the product description, I looked at the notes, and it seems like it's going to smell really good. Like, no, you can't do that. You got to go for quality over quantity, and you got to test first, right? The other thing I would recommend is go to Amazon, get yourself a wine cooler, refrigerator, and store your fragrances correctly, because you're gonna just get a longer life out of them. Why would you have fragrances for 1 year, or 2 years tops, when you could have fragrances for 7 or 8 or 10 years? That's the difference. That's why you go and you get a quality wine cooler. And the other thing is, don't follow the fragrance community. Don't be influenced by fragrance reviewers. I would say it's very much in your benefit to go and do your research on a fragrance. Meaning, if you're interested in a certain fragrance and you're like, oh, I just can't find it to test it anywhere, which is actually not true. You can definitely find places to test, like myfragrancesamples.com. But if you don't want to, like, if you're just like, oh, I can't find it anywhere or whatever, and I'm thinking about buying it, let me go, on YouTube, and then you kind of, there's like 20 good fragrance reviewers out there. I'd recommend Armin or Amin, something like that. He's an Indian dude. Loves fragrances, has great reviews. I'd also recommend Robes '08 is pretty good. Actually, he's great. Gent Sense is pretty good. When I first started watching Gent Sense, I didn't really like him. So something about his vibe I didn't like. But actually, he's very quality. He really is a good reviewer. There's a few other guys. I think a guy named Fragmental, something like that. There's a ton of fragrance reviewers. I would recommend don't listen to Jeremy Fragrance. He's somebody who got a lot of people interested in fragrance. Like, he might be good for like newbie, just fresh out of the boat newbies. But he doesn't recommend quality fragrances a lot of the times. A lot of the times he just rides the hype train, and he's like all about his antics and whatever. Don't listen to Jeremy Fragrance that much. I bought a couple fragrances because he recommended them, and I didn't really like, like Ferragamo F Black. I bought because he called it the Wolf of Wall Street fragrance, and I'm like, I don't really understand why he called it that. It's just like a baby powder, super powdery, um, lavender scent, or iris lavender scent, um, which was not too great. I didn't think it was that great. I don't really like it that much, but it did cause me to buy another one called Free Time, Ferragamo Free Time, which is a cheapie that is worth it, that I really like. And then that's one cool thing about the fragrance community is like occasionally occasionally it rewards you. Like you'll just be like, oh, you know what, this one seems kind of cool, and you'll blind buy some random fragrance, and you're like, well, I really love this, and it does happen. You will blind buy fragrances that you really like, but you're rolling the dice. You're taking a risk, when you do that. Um, let's see, anything else? I think I've covered it. Yeah, don't buy hyped up fragrances. Don't buy fragrances just because they're advertised, on the TV, or advertised in magazines or whatever. Like, test first, man. Always test first, for real. Test first. Go to J.C. Penney's, go to Sephora, go to Macy's, go to these little fragrance shops in the mall and test, and you'll find great fragrances, and then you'll be like, wow, I was thinking about buying this fragrance, and I came and I tested, and I really don't like it, and I'm glad I didn't buy it, like. So that happens a lot too. That's about it, man. Steer clear of the fragrance community weirdos, steer clear of the hype train, be kind. It's expensive. Yes, it's an expensive hobby, but it's fun, and it's not terribly expensive. It's not like collecting watches or something. Watches are like a couple $100 a hit. I know people who collect watches, and like, just so expensive. Fragrance is more affordable. It's something where it's like, you know what, this isn't going to break the bank. Say you even bought like one fragrance for $50. Say you bought a $50 to $70 fragrance once every month. That's pretty doable for most people. That's pretty affordable for most people, even people on a budget. You can afford $50 to $60 a month, and then at the end of the year, you're gonna have 12 great fragrances, probably, if you go out and do your research and you test and you find things that are good for you. Um, I will say one of the downfalls of collecting fragrances is that you do kind of get addicted to it a little bit, and it can become an obsession when you're like, oh, I want this fragrance, I really want this fragrance, and the reason why is because when you get a new fragrance and it smells really great, you love it, and it gives you this good experience, and you're like, wow, this is so good. Like, I'm really loving this fragrance I'm wearing, and like, I smell so good, and it makes me feel so good, and like, and you want that again and again, and a lot of times, you get kind of bored with like, okay, I got these 6 fragrances that I wore all year, and I really love them, and but I wore them all year, and now I'm kind of bored of them. Now I want like 6 more that I can wear next year or something like that, right? And so like, it can get away from you. Like, what I think is the best method is, I think that you should find 10 to 20. And I know that probably sounds like a lot, but if you're a collector and you get addicted to it, 10 to 20 is not a lot at all. Like, I would say 10 to 20 fragrances. 10 to 20 fragrances that you love for all time, that like I will wear for the rest of my life, and I'll just rotate between these 10 to 12. I think that's a good model to shoot for. That's a good goal to shoot for, because as a man, you should smell good. As a man, you should like the way that you smell, and how you smell is kind of, it depends. It depends. Like, there's a time and place for every type of fragrance, and a fragrance can enhance your personality. It can enhance how people view you. It can enhance, um, the impact you make around the people around you, or it can take away from that. If like they don't like you, they'll associate that smell with something that they don't like. Or if like your fragrance is not very good, they'll be like, oh, this guy doesn't smell very good, and they might not like you because of that. It's a weird thing. And smelling to a man is kind of how a man dresses as well. People, believe it or not, people judge you by how you dress. They categorize you subconsciously by how you dress, and they treat you differently if you dress better or you dress a certain type of way. And when I was like in my early 20s, I read this book. I think it was called like The Art of Masculinity, or The Art of Being a Man, or something like that. How to Be a Man, or something like that. And I've looked for this book over and over again, and I can't find it. But I read it at the library when I was like in my early 20s. I think that around age, right around age 20, 19, 20. And I read it, and it was one of my favorite books. And I'll never forget, in that book it said, each man needs to find his own unique style. Every man has their own style, and you should have style. You should know how to dress and style yourself to make yourself be unique, and something that's your unique style. And I would say that it doesn't necessarily have to be flashy, doesn't necessarily have to be super cool necessarily. You should have your own style, something that's you, that accentuates your personality, that accentuates your disposition, right? Somebody who might be a little more depressed is probably going to wear black more often. They're going to wear more low key, bland clothes. A guy who's like outgoing, has a very extroverted personality, he's going to wear maybe louder clothes. He's going to wear brighter colors, or like, a guy who's a bad boy, he's probably going to wear a leather jacket. These are just examples of, kind of backing up what I'm trying to say, is that find your unique style. And it's the same with fragrances. Find fragrances that really are unique to you. And again, you should wear fragrances for yourself, not necessarily to impress others, not necessarily. I think deep down we all want others to think we smell good, because we all want to make a good impression on others, particularly women, right? Which is fine. But I would say that I would steer clear of buying fragrances that just to impress others, particularly fragrances that you don't like. If you like the fragrance and it smells bomb, and like girls love it, and other people compliment you, that's just icing on the cake. If you buy it for yourself and you yourself love it, that's what the fragrance game to me is about, and that's what I think everybody should shoot for. It accentuates your personality. It kind of helps you enjoy life a little bit more. It helps you make good memories. It sort of enhances your experience in life. It makes you feel good. That's what a good fragrance should do and should be. If you're buying fragrances just because the mainstream hype train is like, oh yeah, buy this fragrance, woo woo woo. Occasionally it's right. Most of the time it's just going to be some people pleaser, crowd pleasing, mainstream fragrance that is pleasing to everybody. You want something unique for you, because then that way you can really enjoy the fragrance, and then also it kind of enhances your life. That's really what fragrance is all about. All right, guys, I'm going to end it there. Appreciate you listening. Stay cool, you know. And you can recommend good fragrances to other people. If you really like a fragrance, or giving away a fragrance to somebody is a really good gift. Particularly if you know that's a good fragrance. And if you get to a point where like you got 40, 50 bottles, you start to learn what classifications of bottles fit into what categories, and then based on that you can give away fragrances that you think fit somebody else's personality, and they'll actually really appreciate that. Like if you got a classy older brother who's like very manly or whatever, you might give him a certain type of classy manly fragrance. If you got like a sporty cool fun little brother who plays sports and chases girls, you might give him a certain sporty type of youthful fragrance, for instance, right? And it goes for females too. If you got like a sister, you might know like a floral type of female fragrance that you really want to give your sister, something like that, right? So it's just it kind of enhances you. It makes you more of a classy person. It makes you more intelligent when you learn all these things. And you can even get into it to the point where like how a fragrance is going to smell based on the notes, and you study the note composition, and you learn all this kind of. You can get really deep into it that way too. And it's a fun hobby. It can be expensive, but it also doesn't have to be necessarily. It can be an affordable hobby, and it's going to take up some of your time, but that's what hobbies do. They take up your time, and you enjoy it as you go. The more you learn, the more you enjoy, and the more knowledge you gain, the more you're able to apply the knowledge. It's like with anything in life, and it can help you in those ways. It can build your character because you're reading something, you're learning about something, you're growing as a person in doing so, and you're also applying that. You're like, oh, I really like these notes. I read all this, and I know what event or scenario setting to wear this particular type of cologne. it's cool, it's fun, right? And it can accentuate your personality as a man, can make you feel better about yourself, could help your confidence, and just in general, all around improve your life. But you got to be wary of some things, right? You got to be wary and you go about it the right way. So I hope this, little video was a basis for some knowledge and to help guys learn, particularly guys just coming in the fragrance community. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Learn from my mistakes, and I hope this helps people out. All right, appreciate you guys listening. It's been Jay Lee, Northwest Podcast. Peace.